Welcome to the EATYALL Podcast, where we discuss the struggles and successes of the farmers, food producers, and chefs who are working to get better ingredients into restaurants today and to ensure their availability in the future.
This episode of the EATYALL Podcast is made possible through a partnership with the Kentucky Beef Council, an organization working for the cattle producers of Kentucky in areas of promotion, education, and research. Learn more at kybeef.com. That's kybeef.com.
Welcome to another edition of the EATYALL Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Chapman. And yet again, Mariana has showed up for work. This will be how many in a row?
I think this is my fourth podcast.
There we go. You're actually featured in some of the content later on in next week's episode as one of the co-hosts. So welcome for that, too.
It's my big breakthrough moment.
Your big breakthrough. Just keep playing your cards right. You could get more and more airtime. So this week we are in Kentucky in a rainstorm and most importantly on a Belted Galloway beef farm. Mariana, do you know what a Belted Galloway is?
I think it sounds expensive.
Well, it sounds delicious to me. And we're going to jump into a little different format this week than last week because we'll be wandering around the farm. We'll be under a tin roof that's getting rained on. You'll hear some actual animals in the background. We'll be with Jon Bednarski, our featured Kentucky beef farmer with Sherwood Acres in LaGrange, Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right. This is a different format. We've done chef camps with the Kentucky Beef Council in previous years and had many chefs out learning about the beef operations in Kentucky. But this year with COVID and everything that's going on, we did a little different setup. So since we couldn't have a bigger chef camp and overnight, we took these guys out and recorded their experience on the farm so they could kind of just share what they saw and learned with our podcast audience. And what chefs did you take out with you, Andy?
Well, I wanted to bring some guys that really know beef and love beef. And so I invited Chef Philip Cronin and Michael Krafft, who love some steak. They've cooked a ton of steak, and they both currently work with Jeff Ruby's at a massive steakhouse in Kentucky. They seem like the kind of guys we'd want to bring to a beef farm. They brought their friend Spencer Searles with us. We had a great group, and so let me just set this up for you. So we're on the farm with Katelyn Hawkins from the Kentucky Beef Council and these three Kentucky chefs. And we pulled up and almost immediately just jumped in talking to Jon Bednarski, the farmer, and Katelyn. And after a few minutes into our conversation, the rain starts. So you'll hear that in the podcast.
Like rain on a tin roof, right?
Right. And we'll see how much the producer can reduce that. But it is really good. And there's a lot more kind of background sounds, ambient things going on in this podcast that are kind of fun.
So we'll just jump right in with Katelyn talking about how Jon got started on his farm, right?
Yep, let's do it.
He saw the need for a meat product, and that's what he's anchored his whole operation around, which is really wonderful to see because a lot of farmers here, they've started doing that, but not all of them are as diligent and thoughtful about the end product and making sure that they're working with all the supply chain opportunities as he's really set up.
Well, part of it's because I didn't have any bad habits. You know,
True.
Dad didn't do it a certain way, and Grandpa didn't do it a certain way. And everything I learned, most of it I learned through UK Extension, the cattlemen's, and our conservation district on the stewardship side. Yeah. Happy cows make good product, and
absolutely,
you see the evidence of it all the time.
So what made you want to be a farmer?
You know, my uncle had a dairy farm in Vermont, and when I was a kid, I used to show cows in the county fair and speed ahead 40-some-odd years. My daughter got involved in horseback riding. So we decided we'd buy a small farm, and then my wife and two kids bought me 3 Belted Galloways for Father's Day because they knew I had an interest. And I was in the log home and timber frame business for about 40 years, still am. So I had retail and marketing experience, and I thought, you know, this was in 2005. The local food movement was starting to grow wings and legs, and I thought, you know, I can sell this product. I don't know how to raise it, but I can sell it. Yeah. And so we started out at a couple of farmers markets in metropolitan Louisville, and it just went crazy. Yeah. Because, you know, people were selling produce and, you know, vegetables and stuff like that and fruits, but nobody sold meats. And so we were fortunate that my ag agent told me about a direct beef marketing grant that at the time was $5,000, and it was KCA was involved in it and the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. And I thought, here's free money, I'm going for it. But what it did is it gave us some guidance, and we worked with the Kentucky Proud was just kicking off at the time. And so for someone who's a startup business to have that kind of endorsement, that Kentucky Proud endorsement, was just huge. So we did a professional display, we built a website, we built literature. And so when we showed up at the farmers market the first day, we looked like we'd been in business for years, but we had only been in business a short time. And, the interest was just phenomenal. Ironically, when I grew up in Vermont, my dad was a meat cutter. He had a small general store, and he cut meat. And I can remember when I first got my driver's license at age 16, he sent me up to the meat packing plant to get a side of beef in a station wagon.
So you had to put that in the back of your car.
So, it was the old station wagon, and these guys lay this side of beef in on some meat paper, and I drive 20 miles back to the store. You're not worried about refrigeration. You're not worried about anything. And so what's kind of cool about it, or interesting about it, I should say, is that he died before I ever got into farming. And so he never realized that I got on the production end where he was on the meat side, the cutting side. So it's been a great ride, and it's been fun to be involved. And as you can see from the weather here today, it's 24/7. It's every day, 365 days a year. Well, and, Kentucky's an interesting state for farming. Growing up in Vermont, the ground would freeze up there in November, and it would thaw in the spring of the year, and it was frozen all winter long. And you had snow on the ground, and you had cold weather. But here, I think it's harder to farm in Kentucky than almost any other state, because in the course of a week, it could be 16 degrees one day, a front could come through, it could be 50 2 days later, you could get an inch of rain, and then by Friday, it could snow and it could freeze again. And so you think about those temperature changes, it's hard on animals, because what we want is daily gains, and it's hard to put gain on cattle in our winters.
You're stressed.
And then the other thing from the environmental standpoint is, if they're standing around, and you've seen them, if they're standing around in a foot of mud, eating off a wet bale of hay, are they really gaining weight? Are they just maintaining weight? What's the health issues that go along with that? And so we store all our hay inside, and everybody can't do that. I understand that. But we store all our hay inside. We buy it from a farmer who stores it inside. We test our hay to make sure it has the nutritional value that it needs for these cattle to prosper. And then we put it under cover for them to eat again. And so I go by these farms that have manure piles that are as big as a mountain. Our manure pile is out behind this barn, and it's not as big as this trailer right here, because we have very little waste. And
how many cows do you have?
Well, between the two farms, we run about 50 head, but we only have steers.
Yeah.
When I first started out, we had mama cows, and if you look at it in a given year, if you breed your cows, 50% of your calves are going to be female and 50% are going to be males. And so we only wanted to raise the males because they grow faster, and we didn't have enough land to be able to have two groups of cattle. And the females, they're going to come into heat every 21 days as they get older, and so the males are pestering them all the time. So they're not growing as fast as the males. So we decided, and part of it, I became president of the Belted Galloway Society in 2012, and I made a pledge to our membership across the country that my wife and I would visit one member farm in every state during my 2-year term. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to kind of reconnect the organization to the people who supported it, but also to see how these guys were farming in these other states. And so to see what a guy's doing in California or a guy's doing in Vermont are just so different. We all have the same end result, but we all get there a different way. And so if you're in the calving business, you got to be there. You spend 9 months creating a calf. Are you going to lose it because you're not there and you're careless? So we ended up changing to an all-steer herd. So we buy weaned steers, Galloway and Belted Galloway, both from Scotland originally, from a couple of different suppliers. And then we don't need $3,000 or $4,000 bull, multiple bulls to breed these cows. We're in the meat business.
Right.
And so we want to produce a product that, we have good control over. And we just didn't have the acreage. This farm here's small. It's about 50 acres. And so we're running about 25 head on 50 acres, same in our other farm in Oldham County. So, we need to be efficient. We're rotationally grazing at both farms. We have feed supplements that we're using to make sure they get all of the nutrients that they need to produce a good product.
You were talking about hay. Do you get that locally?
Yes, we do buy some hay in this area, but most of the hay I'm buying actually up near our other farm, and I transport it down here. So,
but in Kentucky.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, we test all of our hay. We think that's real important. Yeah. A few years ago,
test hay?
You take a hay sample. You actually have a core that drills into the hay, and you drill in and take samples from about 10 different bales, maybe different lots of hay. You can send it to the Kentucky Department of Agriculture for testing. We send ours into a company called Dairy One, who does a lot of dairy hay because they're looking for some things that others are not looking for with dairy production. And then we get a sample back, and that tells us, where the protein levels are, what we need for additional protein or energy. There's a lot on a hay report. And so at that point, we look at it and say, this is what we need to add, or we're good. We don't need anything else, because 2 years ago, we had a lot of rain in the spring. Hay was being cut very late. And if you cut hay past its prime, and in Kentucky, that could, they were cutting hay that was supposed to have been cut in late May and early June. They were cutting it in July. There's no nutritional value in it. And so what was happening is cattle were dying in the winter. When they did autopsies, their bellies were full of hay. Right. There was no nutritional value. So it didn't matter how much they ate. It was going in and it was going out, but they weren't maintaining anything. They weren't getting the nutrients that they needed. And so at that point, it's a real eye-opener to say, cattle need, my cattle need to keep growing, every day. And so it's important to put the right products into them.
All right, so we've heard a lot of history on why Jon got into this particular breed. Do you remember what they're called, Mariana? This is a quiz.
A quiz? Is this like a pop quiz?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go with Belted Galloway.
Yeah, I figured you'd have the answers. If you've never seen a Belted Galloway, by the way, you should go Google what they look like, because they are an amazing thing. But what's cool to me about Jon's approach is that he's literally working every advantage he can get to get weight on these steers for his freezer beef. So that's sort of a litmus test for food nutrition. I haven't heard a lot of folks testing hay. I grew up around a lot of cattle farmers. Nobody was testing hay.
My dad never did that. I don't ever remember taking core samples out of a hay round bale and sending it off for nutritional analysis. So this is definitely next level food nutrition stuff going on here.
All right, well, let's get back to the farm. Jon and Katelyn have way more to say on food supply, watering, and how to find the programs that help them keep those cattle fat and happy.
Was it just trial and error, kind of figuring out how much supplementation you need from grass to grain?
No, I think that, with Cooperative Extension and the feed professionals that they have there, Jeff Lemcooler's done some stuff with us at the university. He's as sharp as they get, been in the business for years, started in the dairy business in Wisconsin, and, they can pretty well tell you what you need to do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The unknown is the grass.
Yeah,
here in Kentucky, this year was a great year for grass, but I can remember 4 or 5 years in a row where we had 60 days over 90.
Yeah.
Grass doesn't grow when it's like that. And the mistake that I made early on was I kept the cattle on the pasture, thinking they'll get a little bit out of it. The problem is they eat the grass all the way down to the ground. And there's only one thing that'll grow when there's no grass, and that's weeds. So then at that point, you've destroyed your pastures. You've got to reseed your pastures. So what we do now is, if we don't have the forage out there for them, we'll bring them into this area in the back, which we'll show you, and put them on hay.
Yeah.
That way you're saving your pastures, and then there's 4 pastures that are connected to this feeding area, so we can send them out into one. We put them out there for 6 or 7 days, and then we put them into another one so that there's rest on those pastures.
Jon keeps mentioning extension, and one of the One of the great benefits about Kentucky, and a lot of other states have extension programs where you take all different sorts of backgrounds and knowledge within agriculture and you can provide that educational experience to the farmers. Kentucky's unique because our extension program is very strong. There's an extension office in all 120 counties here, and we have the opportunity to work with those animal nutritionists or meat scientists so they can get all of that knowledge for free through those programming instead of having to work with a third-party company. There's also a lot of cost-sharing opportunities through extension offices where they're getting money from different entities to be able to put in waterers or fence or buildings or buy freezers for keeping their meat if they're doing a freezer business. And it's been great to be able to see, and Jon does a really good job of it, using those resources. And hearing that he's so hungry for knowledge is a really unique opportunity then for younger farmers to get that guidance through him and see what resources there are.
And we've done a lot of field days, both on this farm and our other farm. I don't look at these other guys, even if they're in the beef retail business, I don't look at them as competitors to us at all. There's so much room for growth in that area that I'm just happy to share what it took me time to learn. And, you know, the cost share money is great, but for me, it's the educational part of it. You know, how do I put in an automatic watering system, or how do I put in what's called a shallow stream crossing to get our cattle safely across the creek to the other side and not have them standing in the creek, and how do you do that stuff? And, you know, as a beginning farmer, I didn't know. Right. But these guys come out with a plan. They give you technical assistance, and then if you do a good job at the end, you get a check. That's awesome. And you know, that's a great marriage, if you will. Yeah.
All right, so Katelyn, what's our agenda for the next little bit here? What's the plan?
So what we're going to be doing, Jon's got steers here, as he mentioned, and he's got this wonderful feeding pad. So he's going to bring steers up, kind of show you guys the grain supplement that he would use to bring those in and be able to look at them, discuss with you kind of how he goes about that, what he's looking for. He's also got some plans, which I'd love him to touch on, about handling facilities. So he's going to put in a working facility here so when they actually need to put tags in their ears or give a vaccine or just get the cattle up for some reason, he'll describe a little bit of that. And then he's also got a lot of different opportunities to look at sustainability and conservation and how he utilizes those environmental practices on the farm that he put on his other farm and is now transitioning them here. He's been nationally recognized for environmental stewardship and does a really good job of taking the time to understand how to minimize the mud like he talked about, but really get a snapshot into how they're going about being able to utilize the resources that we have in Kentucky, farm 365 days a year, and provide a product to consumers, chefs, retailers alike. It's a little bit of everything.
Just popping in here as we transition to another clip in this farm tour audio, one of the fascinating things about Jon's farm is his approach to carcass quality. He's talking about that in this next clip.
And then energy is another thing, and I don't know all of the ins and outs of, you know, hay and nutrition, but, you know, energy is a big thing, obviously, in the wintertime because of the temperatures. Yeah. You know, they need that energy to not only maintain their weight, but to grow. For me, I mean, you know, we're talking about, you know, some of these guys that finish cattle, that bring them up 90 or 120 days before they're going to process them and put them on heavy feed. And I have a hard time believing that you can put marbling on a carcass just in 90 days. Right. So our cattle, from the time we get them at 6 to 8 months old as weaned steers, they're on feed. And I don't really increase it that much as they get older. You know, these guys are getting, it's probably going to average out to probably less than half a percent of their body weight, what we're doing right now. But it also gives me the opportunity to see them and to give them a little bit of supplement to what they're already eating, just make sure that they're doing well. He is big because he's the pet. Okay. and
what's his name?
He has no name. You don't name him.
maybe
Ribeye.
Ribeye. I was going to say Ribeye sounds like a good one.
But with a group of cattle like this, I always keep. This guy's the leader. Yeah. He brings these young guys in.
The alpha, yeah.
He brings them in every single day. And he's actually about 4 years old, and we're just talking about processing the time and when. And typically, we would like to process around 24 It's all right. It's all right. Yeah, 24 to 30 months. Because when you're 90% grass-fed operation, you are not going to get the weight on your cattle as quickly as you are in a feedlot operation. Galloways are the original, actually one of the original breeds of cattle. They were started back when Aberdeen Angus were started in Scotland. You know, you're going back into the probably 600 years ago. And so these cattle have kind of a heavy hair coat, as you can see. The blacks and the duns and the reds are the original Galloway colors. These whites are not as old a breed. They were crossbred with an animal called a white park, which is a British breed. And you can see if the mama cows were bred with a black bull, then the whites have black points. You can see their legs and their ears.
Hi, everyone. It's Mariana, and let's talk beef for just a minute. It's been informative and eye-opening to visit several Kentucky-based beef operations with chefs over the past couple of years, thanks to the hospitality of the Kentucky Beef Council. One thing we've learned is that a lot of thought and care goes into raising beef with superior flavor, texture, and nutrition. I want to put the best in my body in terms of flavor and nutrition, and I bet you do too. One way you can do that is by reading labels for country of origin and asking more questions about where and how your beef is raised. That small bit of thoughtfulness will make a big difference to your health and to the sustainability of producers like those in the Kentucky Beef Council who work hard every day to bring only the best to your plate.
All right, so before we jump back into the interviews, I need to remind folks, we are out on location, on the farm, because you may be driving down the road listening to this next bit and think you're hearing gunfire. There's actually quite a bit of gunfire in the background. Jon told us he's got some neighbors that enjoy shooting. I think they were sighting in rifles or something in the background. Just be prepared as we learn a little bit more about the steak cuts, the Belted Galloway breed, that sometimes you get a little gunfire in the country. But we were safe. It didn't faze Jon or these chefs. And we've got 3 clips for you here, including our popular lightning round at the end. So stick around. This is good stuff.
A lot of these breeders, or a lot of these producers, they want to get their cattle to the processor at 14 to 16 months. And when you're grass feeding, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, and you read some stories about this, articles about this, that flavor and the taste of the beef definitely enhances as it gets a little bit older.
It does.
And
Fatty acid profile.
yeah. And so we look at the age, but we also look at the weight, because when you're selling on the retail level, if you took an 800-pound steer and then process it, the New York strips and the ribeyes would be very small. And even though the consumer says we want a smaller piece of meat today, we're trying to reduce our red meat consumption. If it looks different, they think something's wrong with it. And so if we take an animal in that's maybe a little underweight, or an animal that's not going to grade as well, we're doing minute steaks now, which has been a great product for us, about a 3/8-inch cut steak. And people like them maybe with a salad or with eggs or something like that. And that's been a huge success for us. So we get all the carcasses graded when we take them down to Boone's through the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. And then we make decisions based on that, what we're going to do with that carcass.
What made you decide to go with the Galloway?
When I grew up in Vermont, the Belted Galloway, which is the black with a white belt around it, which we have on our other farm, they came into the U.S. back in the 50s, up in Maine, up in the New England states where I was from. So I was kind of familiar with the breed. And I didn't want to be the typical black-hide Angus producer. I knew from a marketing standpoint that we could paint our delivery van like a Belted Galloway. And when we went to the farmer's market and people saw us, they would say, that's the Belted Galloway beef guy. That's not just the beef guy. And so it was a marketing decision as much as it was anything for me. When I was president of the Belted Galloway Society for 2 years, a lot of our members always said, we want to become a mainstream breed. And I said, you're never going to become a mainstream breed. Let's take what we've got. Let's market what we've got and use that. And probably we have about 1,000, 1,100 members across the nation, and I would have to say that probably average herd size is only about 14 or 15 cattle, and they're basically hobby farmers, and that's okay.
I've never seen cows like that.
Well, they have that heavy hair coat, and, what's interesting about us is that one of our biggest states, Belted Galloway side, is Texas, and you would think with that heat that would be an issue down there. And I mean, it is an issue, and to a certain extent because of the heavy hair coat, but they obviously have to have good water source. And you'll see all of our water source is sourced underground. So we're bringing water out at 50 degrees. The cattle are not in the pond, they're not in the lake. And then we have to give them some good shade, and protect them. And I think what happens with this breed is maybe because of their genetic makeup, maybe they're not as efficient on those 80 and 90 degree days.
Yeah.
And they're growing a little bit slower. And if I was going to start from scratch today and I was looking at 100% efficiency, this probably wouldn't be my breed of choice. Mm-hmm. But from a marketing standpoint, carcass quality standpoint, we've done real well with him.
How old is this one?
He's about 3.5 years old. And he weighs probably right around 1,600. What happens in contrast, he makes all the other guys look small. Right. But there's a few of these cattle that will start going in December. We've been pulling out of our other group of cattle at the other farm. But typically I like to be around 11 to 1,300 pounds, somewhere in that range. And I don't know if you know from the processing side, but when you start with a 1,200-pound animal, your hanging carcass weight, once you get to that point, is going to be about 700 pounds. Yeah. And we don't do any bone-in cuts typically, so we're going to bring home about 475 to 500. Yeah. And out of that 500 pounds, there's about 300 pounds of ground beef. Yeah. Yeah. So the primals are a real small part of that. Yeah. We do flat irons and flanks and skirts and tri-tip roast. We take anything we can and make it into a steak.
Yeah, you got to.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah, just from a price standpoint.
In our office, I'm a little bit of the Debbie Downer because my background is meats. So when we get those phone calls about, I think I'm going to start freezer beef or I want to get in the processing industry, my first comment is, well, what are you going to do with the grind? Right. Because that's the most you're going to get off the carcass. So being able to have that plan going into it or seeing how you can do some alternative cuts is really key, especially to those smaller producers that are wanting to just fill a niche void. And Jon keeps talking about marketing, which is really nice to see the transition of the beef industry where you've got programs like Certified Angus Beef, which everybody knows. I mean, it's world-renowned. And a lot of cattle fit into that bracket, but not all cattle are going to fit there. Not all operations are going to fit there. So it's really nice to see how farmers, and whether it be the older generation or the newer generation that's coming up and pushing them, to think outside the box and see where they can fit in the mold or even run two different operations under one branding name.
Yeah. And when the economy, we started in 2005, and when the economy started to tank, we saw the steak sales kind of tail off and the burger sales went up, and the restaurants at that point really started to push the burger product, and it's been a huge reward for us because the opportunities on burger are never been better.
You used to work at a restaurant that you guys put about half cows every 2 weeks.
No, we get a whole cow every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. So you guys,
and there was a lot of grind to get rid of.
Yeah, you realize that. Yeah. And we found a few restaurants because that's a great thing for a producer like us is to take a half or a quarter beef or something like that and let them deal with it. Right. And let them take the stuff that's hard to sell for you and try to get it on their menu somehow. And so don't see much of that. And of course, a lot of chefs are not really set up to cut beef.
Right.
Takes some room.
Yeah, and when you got a Creation Gardens and you order 2 New York strips and 2 ribeyes and they get it there the next day, it's a great setup for you guys.
What interesting steaks would you guys do? I saw like a Denver cut.
Yeah, the Denver's probably my favorite. It's a little harder to get to, and most people think maybe don't even know about it, but just everything really.
That's been the fun aspect of the beef industry.
I mean, everybody goes crazy about the hanger, but it's not my favorite.
Peel all the muscles apart and see what works and what doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me get in here and feed these guys.
To work, Jon.
Let me get these feed these guys.
Somebody get a picture of Phil holding the bucket.
If you store your hay outside, and everybody can't do that, and I'm not down in those guys, but 25 to 30% of that hay that's stored outside is going to get torn off by the cattle. And it's going on the ground because they won't eat it. It's wet, it's got mold in it, or whatever. And so we pay a little bit more per bale, not a lot, to store it inside, get it dry, store it inside, and then keep it dry when we put it outside. And then we have less waste that we have to deal with. We just bought a manure spreader for the first time. I bought it with another guy. because we just don't have a lot of hay to spread or manure to spread.
Right.
So,
Well, that's when we were walking over there, I pointed out that it's concrete pad instead of mud.
Yeah.
Which is like you were talking about, reducing that mud problem, but also it gives you an opportunity to be able to watch the cattle walk, look at their feet, evaluate them from more of a solid base versus are they slipping because it's slick, things like that.
Right. And I have a skid loader, and I can go in there and scrape that off, and I'll put it in my manure pile and then let that compost over the wintertime and then spread it in the spring or the summertime. And that was a cost share program that was offered by the state, not federal. And that particular program, at the time we did it, would pay up to $15,000 or 75% of the total price. And that particular facility didn't include a roof. And this is kind of strange. A roof was not part of that state cost share, and they wouldn't pay for that. You could go on and put it on after the fact, but they didn't want to pay for that. And my problem is, here I am storing hay inside. I bought it stored inside. I'm going to put 6 bales, not 1 bale. I'm going to put 6 bales out there. It's going to stay there for a week. What if it rains all week? Now it's all wet again. Plus their heads are underneath there eating that dry hay. So we came back in after we were paid out on it and put that roof on the top. But we decided too on that one. That one's all hot dip galvanized. A lot of guys would use a 6x6 treated wood post and a gate in between there, and that's fine. And you can probably build that facility for about $20,000. You get your 15 back. We went a step above with that galvanized because it's forever. And that setup there costs, not including the roof, about $25,000. We got $15,000 back.
There are a lot of farms that are purchased where people start completely from scratch, and there are a lot of opportunities to repurpose some facilities, but putting in thought and seeing those different cost opportunities and really materials is catapulted a lot of opportunities.
Right. So that was a great program, and then the following year they went to $7,500, and I said, people are not going to build these facilities for $7,500. They need an incentive to do that, and this year they've gone back up. And the whole idea of the facility is it's not just to make cattle comfortable. If a lot of these conservation programs are to protect the water and the environment. And if those cattle are standing out in that mud and they're pooping and they're dragging it, down into the creeks and into the streams, nobody benefits from that. And especially if that's their water source. And you've driven by and you've seen cattle out in the middle of a pond in the summertime trying to get cool or keep the flies off them. And some guys don't have city water like I do, and that's the only way they can water their cattle, or they think it's the only way. But there's confined watering areas where you can create a gravel pad. The cattle can walk in. There's gates on both sides. You don't use fine rock. You use bigger rock so that they're not lounging around in there, and they go in, they get their drink, they come out. Or solar chargers to take the water out of the bottom of the pond, which is 50 degrees, not 90 degrees like it is at the top. And what are they gonna if they're drinking more cool water, guess what? They're eating more grass. So the health part of it, I mean, it's just like us. If we're uncomfortable, we're going inside. They don't have that luxury. And producing about 25 different products. Yeah. And all of them aren't made at Boone's. Some of them are. We do everything from little breakfast links in beef to chorizo all season. Yeah. We do a seasoned fajita strip. We make the bacon cheeseburger brats. We're doing all natural hot dogs. And it's interesting when people look at the hot dogs because they're pre-cooked, but they don't look pink.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because there's no color in there. There's no nitrates, no nitrites.
Yeah.
And it's the taste of beef.
Yeah.
Some people actually don't like it because it's so different than what they're used to.
So, explain to us, please, Jon. We saw one of your head catches outside.
Right.
So, starting with this, kind of paint the picture for us.
Yeah, well, this is the actual shoot part of it. This is where you contain the cattle if you need to do shots or ear tags. And I just stuck it in here the other day, but that will be turned facing the outside, so they'll come in from that holding area out there, and they'll go into a pen that'll be right here, and then there'll be another pen, and then they'll work their way around, and then they'll come into the chute. And you always put the chute to the outside because they want to see the outside. They want to see the light. That's naturally where they want to go. So we'll come in here and line these walls with wood. This will be the surface because concrete can be a little bit slippery unless you groove it. And so we're working with the supplier that did that project for us out there to come up with a setup here that's safe and works for them. And this particular chute has got a set of scales on the bottom. And so this looks into our scale head. And so you can get as sophisticated as, you know, when the animal steps on the scale, you'll read their ID number. We're not big enough to really be able to do that electronically, but it'll say what their weight was the last time they were on there, what their weight is today, and what their average daily gain was. Yeah. We're not quite there on that because we're a smaller group, but the ability to do that is, you know, all over the place. Yeah, and if you look at the statistics, we are definitely producing more beef per farm or per acre than we ever have before.
Yeah. And if you look at the cattle, I mean, think of like a 1960s, if you Google it or see any pictures, 1960s Hereford or Angus bull, they're short, stocky, little butterball fellas. Now they're taller, they're leaner, they're leggier. You've got a totally different carcass that you're working with.
All right, and that's kind of started to turn the other way, as you know. Cattle got too big. And
yes,
you probably read an article, you know, on the retail side, here's a ribeye steak now on the retail side that weighs, you know, it's an inch thick. It's been cut an inch thick. It weighs 1.5 pounds, and at $15.99 a pound, it's out of the reach of a lot of people. And we see that with some, you know, that big guy. Imagine the size of the ribeye on him. You know,
from the meat,
do you have a grill?
From the other side of the spectrum. So if you're selling carcasses, or if you're retaining ownership, or if you're a feedlot operator and you're selling carcasses into like a Tyson and Cargill and IVP, there are discounts with that carcass. So if you have a bruise, they will take money off of your final check on either side of that carcass. If your ribeye areas are too big, then maybe there's a discount there. If your weights are too large, there's a discount there. If your animal is in a certain age bracket, you can lose money there. So really honing in on, it's a labor problem for their packers and their people being able to move that kind of carcass around, but also that consumer is not going to buy this big old ribeye. Yeah. So then you saw the invention of how do we peel those muscles apart differently. You've got ribeye fillets, you've got cap steaks, you've got Denvers that can come out instead of just going into a chuck roast.
Yeah,
it's cool. I nerd out over stuff like
right.
This.
Well, you got to be creative to meet the marketplace.
You do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I work at Jeff Ruby's and I see some of the steaks that come through there. Like you don't even think about it. Like, so we do like a 64-ounce tomahawk that's probably this thick.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to cook too, right? Yes. I mean, how do you, and the guy wants it medium.
Well,
well,
sometimes
Let me butterfly that for you last
ticket of the night. You're just like,
what's the outside of that going to look like?
But you know, it's
put it in the oven at 350 for an hour and a half.
Yeah, so it's not. It's a challenge on our side, but it's a challenge on your side too, to be able to make that presentation. Because I don't want to say you can make a bad steak good, but you guys can make an okay steak great.
Right.
And that's a feat all by itself.
And I think, and I mean, thank you guys for your time today, all of you, all 5 of you. But this is a really unique position that I get to sit in, is when we bring both sides of the industry together, and you guys can hash it out, talk about it, just put it all out there.
Right.
And this is really cool. So thank you for your time.
I love these opportunities that we get.
Yeah. When I was living in San Francisco, that was like such a big, like, integral part of restaurants is having that relationship with the person who's producing your food and getting to know that kind of stuff. And that's always interested me. And like,
it makes a difference as in the kitchen cooking. Like when I am cooking a steak, I'm not like, oh, gotta get this out. I'm like, I think about the animal.
Respect.
It makes me take care of
these
the
guys
more.
Yeah.
And make sure that it's represented on the plate as it was at the farm.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're cooking 300 of them a night, not everyone you really care about that much.
Well, their story stops, and you guys have to finish that story.
Yeah.
So we, as the beef industry, really value the education component, because consumers are asking you the questions, and you're telling each other in your industry the quote-unquote right answer, or the way that things actually work versus just what you happen to Google that week.
Yeah. And that's the part of it that I love, because a lot of the producers, and really probably 95% of the producers in Kentucky or nationwide, are cow-calf producers, where they want a healthy calf that they can wean and send off to whatever's going to be done with it next. But with me being pasture to plate, I get an opportunity. Last Saturday, I was at the Oldham County Farmers Market talking to consumers about beef, and I get to hear all of the stories, good or bad, that they see on social media or national TV, and be able to answer those questions, from a standpoint of, yes, I've seen it. No, I haven't. This is the way it really is. And it's every day's a new day at the farmers market.
Yeah.
Jon, tell us the name of your farm and kind of give us the general coordinates of where we are here in Kentucky.
Sherwood Acres is the name of our farm, and we have two farms, one located in Oldham County, which is just outside of metropolitan Louisville, close to the Ohio River. And our second farm, where we are today, is in Mercer County. This farm here we've had for about 5 years. Those are the two locations of our farms.
Awesome. Mercer County. All right, so Jon, the lightning round is where we ask a few really hard thought questions and try to get a better sense of who you are as a farmer and a person and a human. So we're going to start with the first one. Biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
All right. Favorite barbecue? Where you going? Ribs, brisket, pulled pork, pulled smoked chicken? What's your barbecue go-to?
Beef brisket.
Beef brisket. All right. Favorite cut of steak?
New York strip.
And how do you like your steak cooked?
Medium rare.
All right, we don't have to unfriend him. All right, that's good. Well, Jon, that was it. Pretty tough. I think you passed on all. We lean a little more biscuits down in Mississippi than cornbread, but as long as you don't put a bunch of sugar in it, we can hang. So, all right. Well, thanks for having us out. It's been great to visit with you guys today.
Appreciate you coming, and it's a great opportunity to share our story and talk about what we do.
All right, well, that's our show for the day. Thanks for joining us, and be sure and check out more about the Kentucky Beef Council and the great work they're doing in Sherwood Acres in the show notes. We'll let you know how to find all these chefs and these farms as always.
You've been listening to the Eat Y'all Podcast, hosted by Eat Y'all founder and Chief Relationship Officer, Andy Chapman. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to us if you'd join us in our mission to save family farms by subscribing and leaving a review. Even better, share this episode and follow us on your favorite social media account at Let's Eat Y'all.